Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about shaky leaf hints and beyond. Now, today's presentation is geared a little bit more towards the beginner. So if you're new to Ancestry.com, hopefully there's going to be a lot of information available for you in today's presentation. But if you've been around a while, I bet you might learn a thing or two as well. So with that small introduction, we've got lots to cover today, so let's dive in. Let's first just make sure everybody understands what we're talking about when we're talking about shaky leaf hints. When you're on Ancestry.com and you're viewing your pedigree chart, when you first come to the page, these little leaves actually kind of wiggle at you or shake at you, and then they sit still. Every once in a while, they'll wiggle again just to remind you that they're there, but that's what we talk about when we talk about shaky leaf hints. So you can view them, you can see here on the pedigree view, when you have hints, you just hover over that, move your mouse over it, and it tells you how many hints you have, 17, that number caught my attention, how many hints you have for a person. Or when you're on a person's profile page, you can see over here on the right-hand side if you have hints. So it'll show, this little box will show up. If there are no hints, this little box won't be here. That's how you know, okay? You can also view hints on the Hints tab for a person. So I can click on that and I can view if there are unreviewed hints, which are the ones that make the little leaf shake or the little box show up. I can view ignored hints. So if I've ignored hints in the past and I want to go back and review those, maybe I've got more information, maybe there's new information that's come to light that might help me understand if those records are actually my person or not, I can view those. And then I can also view accepted hints from this Hints tab. But the visual clue from this page about whether or not you have hints is this little box right here. So the box on the profile page, the little leaf on the pedigree chart. In Family Tree Maker, it's very similar. When I'm viewing my pedigree chart, there will be a little leaf here that I just hover over and it will tell me how many hints I have for any given person. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the shaky leaf. Let me just explain a few things about hints. First of all, they're called hints. That may seem a little obvious, but some people, especially people who are new to the site, they see those and they think, oh, Ancestry.com has found my people, and they just start attaching that information. They're hints. We take the information we have in our database, which is about 12 billion records now, and we compare it to whatever information you've entered into your tree, and we search to see if we can find things that look like matches. But that's a computer doing that analysis. You know your family better than a computer does, and so we expect you, or hope that you, will review those hints to determine whether or not it's really your person or not. That's why we give you the options to review those matches and to ignore them. Another key point about our shaky leaf hints is not every single database in the 12 billion record collection on Ancestry.com is hinted, meaning we only look at about the top 10% of our most popular databases and provide hints to those. So you'll see hints most often for census records, things like World War I draft cards, city directories, those kinds of things, those most popular databases. It's just a way to get you started. It is not meant to be an exhaustive search. Additionally, just because we don't provide you with a hint for a specific census, say there's no hint for the 1930 census, that does not mean that your person is not in that census. It just means the computer can't tell with a high degree of certainty that this is your person. And so we're not going to serve up that hint. So the reminder is just to review all records before you attach them to your tree. And that's really important for a couple of reasons. Some people take the attitude that, well, it's my family tree and it's my research and I can do what I want with it. And that's absolutely true, except that we now, if you have your tree online, you're living in an ecosystem on Ancestry.com where the records that you attach to your tree are then utilized to hint or suggest records to other users. So if you've done it incorrectly, then other people are going to see that same incorrect information. So just make sure that you review those records before attaching. Let me just show you a couple of quick ways you can do that. So here, if I come to, let's come to George Lawrence here. He's got lots of hints. Let's refresh that page. We were doing some maintenance this morning on our website, and it looks like not everything's rolled all the way through the system yet. So when you're reviewing hints, just make sure that you actually click this review hint button, or even better, click on the actual record itself. When you click on the actual record itself, that allows you to review it in a lot more detail, right? It allows you to review what was indexed. You can also then review the original record, which I hope everybody is doing. Always, always, always look at that original record if it exists. So I can come in here and I can determine, is this really my person? Does this record tell me more information about him than what I may have known before? And then I can actually save it from this screen. There's an orange save button over here on the top right hand side. I can click that button and save it to, or attach it to, this person in my tree. So I can save from the image screen. I can also save from the record screen. I can attach this record, click continue, and that would allow me to do that. So rather than always using this review hint button, I would strongly encourage that you click on the record itself, review the record, make sure that it's really for your person, see if there's any additional information that record provides you, and almost always there's more information, right? The index was just created as a finding aid, not as a transcription. So review the record and then attach that record. That's a big deal. After you've attached the record, make sure that everybody you expected to be attached or included was included. So for example, if you're attaching a marriage record, it should be attached to both the husband and the wife. If you're attaching a census record from 1880 through 1940, then it should attach it to every member of the family living in the household. That's because starting in 1880, the census records listed the relationship of everybody in the household to the head of household. And so because that information is in the system, Ancestry.com can say, oh, you're attaching this record to Albert Jefferson Kerr. Well, this is his wife, and these are his children, and this is his mother. And so it'll attach it to everybody in the household. Now, the one caveat to that is census records before 1880. Before 1880, census records did not list the relationship of everybody in the household. And so our computers can't tell who's who. Just because there are some adults and some children living in a household does not mean that those children are the children of that couple. Doesn't even mean that those two people are a couple. They could be a brother and a sister and some nieces and nephews. They could be, there's any number of configurations of households. And so prior to 1880, when you attach a census record, either through a hint or directly through a search, you do have to attach it to each person in the household one at a time. Now, I've discovered some quick ways to do that. Actually, if you watch the Family Tree Maker 2014 preview video, you'll see some of the ways in which I do that in Family Tree Maker that just make it go very quickly. But make sure it's attached. That record is attached to all people included. Now, let's talk about, that's the shaky leaf hints. That was our big introduction to what the hints are. Now let's talk about what's next. Once you have reviewed your hints and either attached or ignored them for a given person, then I'm going to encourage you to review suggested records. Or maybe you've gotten to a point where you can do that at the same time. Here's what I mean by suggested records. So when I'm looking at hints for my great-grandfather here, just open up this 1920 census again. Over here on the right-hand side, I'm going to see a list of suggested records. You'll see here a whole list of suggested records for Albert Kerr. Now here's the deal with the suggested records. Suggested records are generated based on things that other people have attached to their tree So if somebody else has attached this 1920 census record to their tree, these are some of the other records that have been attached to other people's trees. So that's one of the ways in which we generate suggested records. So what you're going to see is that sometimes people aren't quite sure, or a lot of people are new, not quite sure what they're doing yet, haven't quite figured it out. So for example here, there is 2 Social Security Death Index records attached, right? So again, I'm going to want to review them, and I'm probably going to want to review both of them to make sure I have the right person, right? It looks like one of them was born in 1887 and died in 1964, and one of them was born in 1886 and died in 1967. Both have the same name, so maybe somebody just attached both records because they weren't sure which one was him. Now, this is my great-grandfather, and I happen to know that he was living in Fayetteville, Arkansas when he died. And so I also happen to know that he died in 1967. And so I know that that's him. But if you're not certain which record is him, one of the options that we give you is to save this record to your shoebox. That allows you to bookmark the record or hold it in a place so that you can go back and look at it later if you're not certain which record is him, if you need to collect more information, right? If I didn't know that my great-grandfather died in 1967, maybe I want to go talk to family members who were alive at the time and see if any of them remember going to his funeral or getting a phone call or hearing about when he died, right? That would be a way to determine which one is him. If I wasn't certain where he was living, whether he was living in Arkansas or Pennsylvania, I might go look at newspapers, Arkansas newspapers in 1967 or Pennsylvania newspapers for 1964, see if I can find an obituary that might list spouse or children or parents, some other family members that would help me narrow in on whether or not this is my person. What I'm not going to do is attach it to someone in my tree unless I know that this is the right person. Because again, what happens is we end up with these suggested records generated based on what's been attached to a tree for a specific person. So suggested records are going to show up there on the right-hand side when you're viewing the record page. There's another place they're going to show up, and they're the same records. It's just another way to see them. When you're viewing an image or a record page, if you just move your cursor over here, you're going to see a little green bar pop up. I can click on that, and now here are some of those same suggested records listed here. So I can just another way to get to those suggested records. I have gotten to a point in my research where I do that while I'm reviewing hints. I also review suggested records, and sometimes they're the same thing, and it doesn't matter. As long as I'm attaching those records, they're going to disappear off of this hints list, okay? So review your suggested records, and you can do that either while you are reviewing hints or once you've completed reviewing hints for a given person. Then, and this is the part that a lot of new people skip over or aren't aware of, after you have reviewed all hints and suggested records, then you need to search. That is the core of the research that we do here on Ancestry.com, is searching the 12 billion record database collection to discover what else might exist about my person. What other records could I find? Now, I have a very methodical way that I do that now that I've kind of developed a rhythm for my research. And so I'll just share with you kind of the process that I go through in my head and on paper as I do that. But the thing you need to know about is that from your tree is probably going to be the fastest, easiest way to search. So when I'm viewing a record page for a person, the profile page, there is a search records link. And I can click that, and it will preload the search box, right? So it actually fills in all of the search information for me based on what I already have in my tree, and then it returns search results. Now, because nothing is marked exact, it's going to give me a lot of search results. That's fine. That's what I usually want right off the bat. Then, and the other thing is I always view, I check out this records view first. So you see here the records view that shows you the ranked records. So the top things are usually going to be for your person or based on those suggested records you might have missed. I'll just look through the first few records like that just to see if there's anything I might have missed in my hints and suggested records process. Then I click over here to categories. Because, for example, if I know that I'm looking for a 1920 census, I'm not going to waste my time going through all of those other search results. I'm just going to look at the 1920 census. And when I'm looking at those 1920 census results, if he doesn't come up on the very top of my list, I'm going to edit my search. We're going to iterate on this search a lot based on what we might know. So for example, if I know he was living, or I suspect he was living in Oklahoma in 1920, I'm going to change that lived in location to Oklahoma. I'm going to mark that exact and then see what comes up. And now I've just narrowed my search results from several thousand to 122, just with that one change, by changing that lived in field and marking that exact. You'll notice, and I do this so instinctively I sometimes forget to point it out, but when I was viewing my search results, in order to view a specific database, I actually right-clicked on that and open the link in a new tab. What that allows me to do is to keep these search results here, but then once I'm looking at the 1920 database, I can edit these search results based on what I know or what I think I know about him specifically in 1920, or based on what I know is recorded in a specific record. So for example, the census only records state as the place of birth. So I might change that birthplace just to Missouri and mark that exact and do that search again. So I can iterate on this particular search in this one 1920 census database, and then once I find the record, I can close that tab, and I'm right back here to my original search results that I did from my tree, and I can look for the next record. So search from the tree, view by category, and then look at one database at a time based on the information that you're looking for. So what is it that you're looking for? Here's kind of here is the process that I go through as I research a specific person or a specific family. After I've looked at hints and suggested records, the first question I ask is, am I missing any census records? Are there any gaps where I haven't found them in a census? Could I do a more specific search for that person, for other members of the family? Is there something else if they were living in the same place in 1900 that they were living in 1920, and I can't find them in 1910, have I searched for their neighbors? Have I searched for all members of the household? Have I just gone to the census records for that town and gone page by page looking for them? Have I searched for them in that town exactly with just a first name or just a last name, right? Lots of different ways you can overcome those missing censuses from hints. And so look for any missing census records. The next step is there any kind of a military record? This is particularly related to men who might have been eligible to register for the World War I draft, but there was a World War II draft, there was a Civil War draft. Even if they didn't serve, they still would have had to register for the draft in many instances. And so I always start by looking for a draft card. Then if there's any evidence that they served, and there is in some census records, I'll look for a military service record. Now, of course, this is a little more difficult with anybody who served in World War I or later, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, because of the fire in the 1970s in St. Louis at the Personnel Records Department. About 80% of the Army service records were destroyed in that fire. So anybody who served after World War I or later, those records are going to be very sparse. But if they served in the Revolutionary War or the War of 1812 or the Civil War, those military records are very, very abundant, lots of them. Not just on Ancestry.com, but also on Fold3.com. And of course, the National Archives holds quite a few records. So is there a military record? Then I prefer to work backwards through their life, just because more recent records are usually more readily available. So does a death record exist? And when I say death record, I'm not talking about just a certificate. Is there a tombstone? Is there an obituary? Are there all three? Could I collect every one of those pieces of information? One of the things you'll discover quickly in family history, if you haven't already, is that not all information agrees with each other. Tombstones sometimes aren't placed for years years after a person passed away. My grandfather died 13 years ago, and there's still no tombstone for him there. My grandmother's still living, and the family will probably place a tombstone for both of them when she passes. And so sometimes tombstones aren't placed for years, so sometimes information on a tombstone is inaccurate, even though it's literally carved in stone, right? So sometimes you have to look for obituaries or more contemporary information. Working backwards through their life, does a marriage record exist? Marriage records have been in existence for quite a while in most places. Now, not all states have kept that, but a lot of times those records are held by counties where you had to apply for a marriage license. Sometimes those records are held by churches, the further back in time that you get. Ancestry.com has huge collections of New England marriage records that date back to the 1600s. Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Vermont. I mean, just some excellent, excellent records, but sometimes you have to go to that specific database in order to search. Now, last week I did an entire presentation on the card catalog, so I'm not going to redo that presentation. But for those of you who aren't familiar, there is a card catalog. You just hover over search and click on card catalog, and it will take you to this page. And then I can come in here and I can type in Pennsylvania, and I will get a list of all databases that are Pennsylvania specific. I can filter that down based on the type of record that I'm interested in. And now I can see here there is a collection of church and town records dating back to 1708. There's about 7.5 million records in that collection. So sometimes we have to go to a specific database, just like that, and do a search there for the record we're looking for. And then kind of the final step in this process that I go through is, does a birth record exist? Now again, not all states kept birth records. Many states have privacy laws on their birth records, 100, 110 years. And so birth records, most of them are not going to be found online. You actually have to contact the county where they were born, see if they will allow you to have a copy of that birth record, which usually they will if you are a descendant. They will allow you to have a copy of that. But because of privacy laws, they're not going to put those online. As you get further back in time, birth records become more sparse, meaning births weren't always recorded. And so again, you have to rely on church records. Was there a christening in a church? Was there, some kind of a record that way of the birth? If not, look for birth information on marriage records or death records or military records or census records. Lots of other ways you can get that information. Okay, in our last few minutes here, let me just share with you the final steps of the process that I go through whenever I'm researching a person. One is just to make sure that I have recorded information about their children and their siblings. This is really important, and some people don't do this, and they have their reasons, and that's fine. But here's why that's important, or one reason why that's important. I was actually researching this family last night, looking into them, this Lawrence family. I looked everywhere to find out what Mary's maiden name was. And it wasn't until I came across the death record of her son, because he died in California. California death records list the mother's maiden name. And so now I know her maiden name simply because I located her son's death record. I wasn't able to find a birth record for her. I still haven't located a marriage record for this couple in Oklahoma. I mean, lots of different holes in the records here. But her son's death record listed her maiden name. Now, of course, I'm going to look for the death records for these other two children next. That's the next thing on my list. But just to corroborate that information, to make sure it's spelled consistently, to make sure they have the same mother, whatever, right? But the more information you collect about children and siblings, the more complete information you have about a family, but also the more likely you are to fill in some of those holes of information. Also, I always, when I'm wrapping up research on a specific family or when I'm stuck doing research on a specific family, turn to local newspapers. Local newspapers in many cases were I call them the Facebook of their day. People recorded the comings and goings in small towns like you can't believe. Somebody came to visit, went to dinner, had a card game at their house. It doesn't matter. It was in the paper because it was local happenings, right? But that also means that if somebody's celebrating an anniversary or a birthday or getting married, that information is big news in some of those local newspapers. Ancestry.com has a huge collection of newspapers on our website, and newspapers.com also has a very large collection of newspapers. There are other places you can find newspapers. I call local libraries a lot if I can't find what I'm looking for online, and just let them know what I'm looking for. Very often you'll find obituaries, wedding announcements, births of children, and people visiting family members with family relationships listed. I've found more female maiden names that way through local newspapers than any other resource other than marriage records. So really excellent resource. And this is important because we're doing family history, not just filling out charts. Think about if there's anyone in your family who might remember the person that you're researching. You know, I've got this research on my great-grandfather that I've done. I never knew him. He died about 5 years before I was born. And so I never knew him. But I grew up my whole life hearing my mom talk about her grandfather and my grandmother talk about her dad and my grandmother's brothers and sisters talking about their father. And so the key is, if anybody in the family remembers that person, talk to them. And then make sure you write down their stories. Capture those stories so that you have that information about them, so that you have a little bit more than just a birth date and a death date, that you have captured something of their personality before it's too late. And then finally, and this is more for people who are looking for people that people don't still remember, right? We're talking about people who were born in the 1700s and the early 1800s, and there might not be anybody left alive who remembers them. Ancestry.com has a huge collection of family and local histories. These were typically created by the local community. They include biographies of prominent people in the community, information about the pioneers of the community, the school teachers, and the postmaster and the minister and the doctor and anybody in that community who might have served on in some kind of a political office. And you may think that your family was just poor farmers who never did anything, but in some of these small communities, everybody did something. And so look for those family and local histories and see if there's any mention of their family, of your family. And then again, record that information. I'll just close by sharing with you just a couple of ways in which I do that. Most of you who've spent any time with me know that I transcribe every record I find for a person. I use the notes feature in Family Tree Maker to record that information. And so let's just come here to my great-grandfather. And here are the notes for him in my tree. Those notes are here in Family Tree Maker. Those notes also show up, if I come back here to his person profile on Ancestry.com, when I sync my Family Tree Maker with my online tree, those notes show up here as well. The major difference or the major thing that you need to know is that these notes, even though my tree is public, these notes are only viewable by myself or anybody that I make an editor on my tree. So my tree is public. Anybody can see this information about my great-grandfather, but only I can see the notes that I've created for him, okay? So they're my research notes, and I transcribe every record. So I include the information that's on every record I find because it tells the story and it helps make sure that I'm on the right track. Many times I've started transcribing a census record only to get about halfway through the transcription and realize this information does not jive with the information I found in other records. And so maybe I'm not looking at the right person, right? We may think our ancestor has such a unique name, but really they may have been named something very similar, or they may have a cousin born about the same time with the same name in the same place. And sometimes transcribing that record helps you see very quickly that you don't have what you're looking for. Or that you found the wrong record. I also make notes here you can see about records I still have to locate or still need to locate for this person. And then down here at the bottom, I've included some personal notes. So in this case, my grandfather, my mom told me he had a nickname for everybody. Every one of his children, every one of his grandchildren, he had a nickname that he used for them. And I know what my mom's nickname was. And so I need to make sure that I get those nicknames from all of the cousins and record those. I also have this little note here. My mom told me that he used to roll his own cigarettes. And he taught a few of his grandchildren how to do that for him. And so as he got older, I actually have a photo of him sitting with a rolled cigarette there. So just little things or little insights into their personality or things that people tell you. That's the kind of information that I record in these notes. Because, as I said, I'm creating a family history. I'm not just filling in information on a form. I'm not just trying to build the biggest tree I can or see how far back I can go. I want to make sure that the lives of these people are captured, that they're captured accurately, and by collecting all of that information, it further ensures that I'm making the right connections, that I'm climbing my family tree and not somebody else's. Well, that is all I have prepared for you today. Hopefully that expands your mind a little bit about what you can do past those shaky leaf hints. I hope that you will do some of those things and record some of that information about some of those people. And the beauty of it is as you start kind of digging into some of those records a little bit further, chances are you're going to break through some of those brick walls a little bit easier than you thought you might. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.